So I take this occasion, it's a special occasion on this Patimokkha Day to Sangha meeting here at Wat Pah Nanachat at the funeral and the cremation of Prajodipanyo. And so this is very impressive. I thought very impressive funeral and cremation. I want to give my appreciation to Ajahn Kevali and Sri Panyo, and of course Ajahn Jayasaro and Ajahn Yanatamo came as soon as they could and helped do this cremation ceremony. And it's only, 3 or 4 days since the death of Prajodipanyo. But I thought it was, I appreciate the fact that it was well done and something that we could all participate in, because we knew him, and when a monk dies like that, it does affect us, and as well as immediate relatives, friends, and so forth. So it's always, important to reflect on death. It's one of our subjects of contemplation, because we're all going to die, and many of us have experienced the death of parents, teachers, loved ones, pets, and so forth, and had to experience the loss of a life, of somebody or something that was close to us. And so this is like a reflection on the way it is that this is what this realm is about, birth and death. It's a birth and death realm, and so it's not a realm for happiness and security and safety and pleasure and excitement, as if these kind of conditions could last for any length of time. Inevitably, everything that arises ceases. So this is a continuous reflection throughout one's lifetime, how the changing conditions, both the subtle mental ones, the emotional ones, and all that we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, think, and feel is in this inexorable process of change. And that's why in Vipassana practice there's always emphasis on anicca, impermanence, because there is a kind of ability we have as human beings to fool ourselves in thinking that we can really depend on something or some condition, some situation, some teacher, some method, some religion, whatever, that will give us a sense of security or well-being or safety, when actually all conditioned phenomena its very nature is change. And even though you've heard this over and over again, it needs to be reflected upon again and again, because we create ourselves, we create the world we live in. And each one of you might think we share the same world, but we don't. In other words, we all live in our own world, our own sense of our own memories, our own emotional tendencies, our karma is like this. And so even though we share maybe something in common, being Buddhist monks in this tradition, and we have a conventional form that unifies us in one respect, but individually we all have to live and find out through our own awareness of the world, the delusions, the fears, the desires that we inevitably experience in our mind. And so a sense of conformity in external appearance is what the Buddha encouraged: the shaven head, the robe, simplicity, to take away, not to emphasize individuality, or caste, or class, or race, or nationality, or anything. It's mostly to diminish these identities, these perceptions that we have about ourselves and each other. But still, the habit tendency is always to personify every monk here. This is, I like this monk, I don't like that one. This is a good monk, this isn't a very good one, this is junior, senior, and on like that. Then we have different nationalities and different ages, and on in this way. And we do create each other. Like Jotipanyo now is, what is he? It's a memory at this moment. We saw the ending, the actual burning of his body. We can smell it now, the burnt body of Jotipanyo. Then how even though I can point this out, how each one of us is experiencing this particular situation at this moment. Only you know what you're feeling or thinking or at this moment in regard to the external conditions. This is a very ancient tradition, traditional form, and over the years, in my monastic life, the power of a tradition has really registered with me, because at first, one just called it the Thai forest tradition, or the word tradition really didn't mean much other than it's something that's carried on. But the value, the importance, how to use tradition, one learns through the actual usage and through the reflection on it, not to attach and form strong views, opinions about any tradition. But the Buddha did establish this, the Dhamma, the Vinaya, in a way, not to be grasped as kind of something to hold on to. But you notice the whole structure of Dhamma teaching in the Sutta is about reflecting on the way things are. It's about using our human ability to observe, to witness, to watch, and not. But it's not to criticize. The thinking mind, your conditioned thinking mind, your intellect, is a critical function. So it's used to compare one thing with another, with one condition with another, with one idea with another. But in Buddhist meditation, the point is to develop what they call sati sampajanya, or mindfulness and awareness, and using wisdom, allowing the mind to contact wisdom, to let wisdom inform us in a way that we can't from our own personal language, thought patterns, views, opinions, cultural identities. It's learning to give up everything. It's a total relinquishment that is being encouraged in this life. The whole life of a samana is about relinquishing, letting go, rather than about attaining and achieving and becoming. And yet we can interpret Buddhist teachings in terms of attainment, achievement, becoming, success and failure, good meditation, bad meditation, and then we have different ideas about different forms of Buddhism, which is the best, which is the pure. And these are the opinions, the views, the critical mind that compares one thing with another. And it's important to emphasize that the thinking mind is for criticizing, for comparing. This is bigger, smaller, important, unimportant, true and false, good and bad. And the only way we can get out of that dualistic thinking habit is through sati sampajanya, or I oftentimes refer to as intuitive awareness, the ability to observe, to watch, and to reflect on the way things are, not from ideas of how we would like things to be, but from the way it is at this very moment. And of course, this reflection of whatever you're experiencing in this moment, feeling, thinking, is like this. It's the way it is. It's not about what should or shouldn't be, but it's a recognition that at this moment, so much of our feelings, emotional experiences, there's no words that we can actually use to accurately describe exactly how one feels in the moment. But when we attach to words, to definitions, to ideas, then we bind ourselves to this dualistic function that has its purpose, but can never liberate us from ignorance or suffering. And so the Buddha emphasized the Four Noble Truths. This was his Patoma Tesana, his first desana, his first teaching after his enlightenment. And so this is why suffering or dukkha is something easy to observe. It's not a kind of highly esoteric, subtle kind of suffering that we need to reflect on. It's just the ordinary, like a stinging ant on your arm, or whatever, whatever, too hot or, tired or restless or whatever. This ability to observe, it's like this, is the way it is. Conditioned phenomena, whatever you're experiencing through the consciousness in the conditioned realm can only be the way it is at this moment. Whether you want it to be or not isn't the issue. It's the way it is. And of course, when we reflect in this way, the way it is, then we're more in touch, more in tune with the changingness, the anicca of conditioned phenomena. So like the Pali teachings, they have this word aramana, which in Thai they take the word aramana, arom. It's the mental state, the object that we can be aware of in the present moment. And all conditions are impermanent. Aramana then applies to what can be observed in this present moment from this position of pure witnessing, observing, not from taking a particular position or attitude or critical view about what we're experiencing, but learning to trust this intuitive sense of observing. And so this one thing that attracted me when I met Luang Por Chah was the emphasis on this mantra Bhutto, because I'd practiced 1 year as a samanera in Nong Khai on my own, just with reading Ñanatiloka's book, The Word of the Buddha, which is about the Four Noble Truths. And so then I got to the point as a samanera where I was really, aware of impermanence and not self, but there was still it had not really sunk in about the knowing. It was like what is it that knows all this? And of course, when you're trying to figure that out with concepts, with words, you say, well, it can't be Samanera, Sumedho, or anything like that. But then, what else is it that it knows if it's not me as this person, these identities of self, as a Samanera, as a new name, Sumedho, and all the rest of the condition in my mind that I would tend to that would influence my experience in the present. So then, these words like Buddha Dhamma Sangha, Bhutto, Dhammo Sangho, over the years, these words have, they can be just kind of ceremonial Pali chants, and we can, chant them, and it's our tradition, and see it in just this external form, and as a part of, do we really need Buddha Dhamma Sangha, or can we just be mindful without Buddhism at all? Do we really need the Vinaya? Can't we just be mindful without all these restraining precepts and that's part of a tradition? Many of us have asked ourselves, is this really necessary? And then various teachers and methods of meditation do, imply that, you don't really need any of these conventions, because you're letting go of all conditioned phenomena, all conventions, and so what's the point of becoming a bhikkhu, a monk? Because you're entering right into a very powerful, very kind of strict and convention that limits what we can actually do and say. So then, of course, the doubt, the thinking, do we really need all this? Can't we just do it just through being mindful? And of course, when I asked Luang Por Chah this years ago, he said, true but not right, right but not true. It's a kind of conundrum or koan, which is, because my limited way of thinking was, if it's true, it has to be right, and if it's right, it has to be true. I didn't really differentiate between right and true. And Luang Por Chah said, "Tuk, they're my jing, they're my tuk." Interesting one, because I was expecting them to give me the party line. You have to have the Vinaya, you have to keep it like this, you have to do it this way, and a kind of strong, exposition and force on the things that you have to have in order to really practice properly. I was expecting a sermon, and expecting a kind of teaching about this is what you have to have and you can't do it any other way. But Luang Por Chah wouldn't teach like that. He brought it into a reflective style. True but not right, right but not true. Well, that takes your thinking mind into a different place, isn't it? It's at least it did with me. I don't know about anyone else. And when somebody of the caliber of Luang Por Chah says such a thing, you're not just going to dismiss it. I mean, you take it quite, everything he said, I was taking quite seriously, because I kind of felt he would never say anything just flippant or, of no value, that this was an important reflection he was giving me. And over the years of living this life, like today, this Patimokkha on this moon night, the funeral, the cremation of Tanjotipanyo, and the power of this traditional form as it's kept in this way is something that we learn how to use, not to identify and cling to, but to reflect from. So that the limitation that we experience through Vinaya is not some kind of ascetic practice to bind us to conditions and moral precepts in order to make us conform. It can be that we can use it in that way, or else we ask ourselves, how can we use this form for awareness? And this is how to use the Vinaya as we've learned it through this Thai forest tradition, Luang Por Chah. Sometimes we get into incredible arguments and views about Vinaya, and get very angry and upset when somebody disagrees. So that's, and of course the Kosambi bhikkhus and the story in the scripture about, opinionated monks about rules and what's right and wrong. But the important thing is to observe this, to observe, to be the aware, that which is aware when you're holding a strong view that you feel is right, and you feel somebody else is wrong. One can observe that as a mental state. I can, anyway. I've certainly had my life full of strong views and opinions to observe them. And so this is like Bhutto Tammo Sankho, the awakened consciousness, awareness of Dhamma, or the way it is. Or another translation I like, and for Dhamma, is reality. It's awakening to reality, to the real. When you want to not use the Pali words, how would you describe Buddha's teaching? It's an invitation to awake to reality. And it's interesting, having lived in Europe for so many years, people tend to think we don't live in the real world. I don't know how many times people have said, you in the monastery don't live in the real world. And the real world is in London with a mortgage and a wife and 2.5 children. And a job you don't like and whatnot, and facing the facts of life, the real world is, for some people is like that. It's about all the being caught in their own limitations without any way to look at them and view them, but just stuck into a particular conditioned worldview that they've aligned themselves with. And then the teaching of the Buddha is to awaken us to that. It's not to pass judgment on other people's lives or lay life or modern society or tradition, but to awaken us to this natural state. It's what they call dhammachat. It isn't a created kind of highly subtle and advanced state of consciousness. It's suddenly letting go of thinking, letting go of our views and opinions. When we really develop this letting go of conditioned phenomena, when we have moments where we let go, where there's nothing left, but there's still awareness. Consciousness still operates. And then there's discernment. There's a panya can inform us of noting non-attachment. Noting attachment is like this, non-attachment is like this. It's not saying non-attachment is better than attachment, because then you're back into the same delusion. But discerning self and non-self. When do you become a personality? Or do you assume you're the same person all the time, when you're asleep, when you're awake, when you're feeling well, healthy, vigorous, when you're feeling sick, nauseous, when you're young or old, when life is going well, when life is falling apart? Is it the same person that you can observe, or does it change according to conditions? And so investigating the atta duaton, or the self-view, or sakkaya ditthi, it's that which is aware. Remember, this is awakening to the self so that you can observe it rather than operate from some idea about not having any self. Because even if you believe that there isn't any self, it's still an attachment to a belief, to a perception, or how you interpret Buddhism. So it's not about believing in no self, but recognizing. And this takes, of course, this sati sampajanya, a kind of apprehension of this moment. For me, for me to become a person, I have to start thinking again. I have to start thinking, I'm Ajahn Sumedho, and I'm an American, and on like that. Then if I have no understanding of that, is merely convention, it's just a samut, what they call samut sacha, I tend to operate from the sense of a self limited to my name, my experience, my memories, my character tendencies, my emotional habits. Can't help it. If I buy into that perception without observing it, then I create this world that is unique to me as a person, is the Ajahn Sumedho type world. It's going to be different from your world than the world that you create out of the self. But that which is aware of self, that is awareness or Buddho, aware of Dhamma, of the way things are. Dhamma then is the reality, or the way it is. It's Dhammacha, it's nature. It's not, we don't create Dhamma. It's not something that we have any say about. It's just learning to recognize Dhamma the way it is at this moment. And so each one of us has to learn to trust ourselves more, to observe, not to, and this observing is, I reiterate, not a critical saying that anything you're feeling at this moment is good or bad, right or wrong, but it is the way it is. Now this kind of practice, reflection, this is what I've loved about this life, is this encouragement to do this, because there isn't much encouragement as far as my experience in what they call, quote, the real world, unquote, is. My experience as a layperson was very much about the ego of promoting myself and comparing myself with others and trying to prove myself, get somewhere, fears about, feeling not as good as somebody else, or feeling jealous or competitive and obsessed with various views and ideas. That was the world that I created before I knew how to reflect on it. And it was a world that always led to some form of suffering, unhappiness, worry, anxiety, despair, with no understanding of how to get out of it, how to free oneself from this. It's so easy to blame circumstances. We're looking for causes, external causes for one's misery. Or maybe we just blame ourselves. We're not good enough. We have it, we're born to suffer, and where some people are born to be successful and happy, and it wasn't that I wasn't successful, but even worldly success was some form of suffering, because the ego was fed on being successful, and when you weren't, then you felt really terrible when you failed at something, or somebody else did it better than you did. And so there seemed to be no end to this form of this illusion of a self. One's whole world generates from this delusion of a self. And so then this Buddho, observe, what is the self? What is Sakya Ditti? It's the first fetter, isn't it? It's one, the first one to deal with before we can get any perspective on Dhamma. If we interpret Dhamma always from the self, and that happens a lot, my view of the Dhamma, my view of the Vinaya, my view of the Buddha's teaching and so forth, can come from, generate from the self view. When I read the Majjhima Nikaya as a layperson, I interpreted it from a mind that was, brought up in a very Christian family, an American middle class Christian conditioned view of life influenced how I tended to read the Pali words or the translation of the Majjhima Nikaya. Because I hadn't really practiced yet to understand it. I did my best to try to interpret it according to my own way of seeing, or the attempts to understand it through the self. Now, in the monastic life, the point is not to bind yourself to monastic form out of self-view. It's not, I'm senior to you, or I meditate longer than you do. The way we can create a self out of monastic tradition is possible. So, important thing is not to create yourself into some kind of monk, or compare yourself with other monks, but to observe. That's what monasteries are really, what their use is. They take us out of that rat race of modern life, the real world, and give us an opportunity to observe and reflect. And not to condemn the world or deny it in any way, but to recognize. Luang Por Chah was always saying the end of the world, and he pointed to his heart, and he says, here, the end of the world is here. And I remember in England that would really upset some people, because these perceptions of end of the world is Armageddon. It's everything's going to, it's part of our cultural view to see the world as external, as the planet Earth, as New York and London and Bangkok and so forth. The end of London, end of Bangkok, and so this is what he means. Or how do we translate world so that it has a practical value? It's not just some absurdity or taken for granted that the real world is what everybody thinks it is. And so then we start observing the world I create, the sense of myself, my fears that arise, and anger, sexual desire, confusion, worry, restlessness, sleepiness, all the five fetters, the five kilesas, and so forth that we have. These are convenient ways of collecting ourselves around what we're feeling, to observe dosa, anger, aversion is like this, lust and greed is like this, moha, and doubt and worry, anxiety, sleepiness, restlessness, all these kind of irritating, frustrating problems that we experience when we're not either angry or aroused sexually. Then we tend to sink into worry, anxiety, boredom, sleepiness, restlessness. So in meditation, then, like vipassana is looking into the way things are. And the way things are then are clearly pointed out. We're not trying to evaluate their worth, but recognize the common characteristics of all phenomena as impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. So in my own experiments with this is that I became very much aware that for me to become a person, I have to really start thinking. I have to think I. Just the pronoun, English pronoun I. What does that do? When you just think to yourself, I, isolate I and just think I. And it has you haven't come to any conclusion yet, but it's a statement of presence, isn't it? It's a statement of being, which is fair enough. It's not personal yet. It's not like a personality comes from I, but then I add to it, I am Ajahn Sumedho. Then this I becomes a person. And then you get into the pronouns like me and mine, and these give this sense of a strong personal attachment or possessiveness. My thoughts, my possessions, my view, these are mine. What I like, what I think, what I don't like, what I think is wrong, what I feel isn't right. These are all created with words, with thoughts. And so the thinking process, remember that you don't start thinking when you're born. The baby born to English-speaking parents doesn't come out and say, I am a little white baby born in a middle-class family in the United States. I mean, that comes later maybe. But then this I, just contemplate, in your own language, because some of you, are conditioned with different language. But in terms of English, I, me, and mine, these are what we call, in grammatical terms, pronouns. So just to point out that the singular I can be a fair enough statement of presence, and it isn't saying anything other than announcing one's presence. And then am, a verb follows in grammatical. This is how you learn languages, through that sequence of nouns, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs. So language is a condition that we acquire after birth. When a baby is born, its natural form, its body is a natural form. It's not created through ignorance or self or view. It's just a form in nature, like anything else. Other forms that arise in nature. The body is this. The consciousness that the baby experiences is not a Thai consciousness or a Western consciousness. It's not male or female. Its consciousness is natural. Nature, ben dhammacha. So recognize that the rupa and vijnana are natural conditions. Vedana, then also, we feel, because it's a sensitive form, born in the sense realm. It was born, and it's born with senses. It's a conscious form that sees, hears, smells, tastes, touch, and then we learn to think in terms of using language and memory and learning, acquired knowledge, and views, cultural conditioning, social assumptions, social attitudes of our particular family and society. But I'm pointing to what is natural first, that isn't Thai, is not English, is not Western, not Eastern. Vedana then is, the experience that we have to feel pleasure, painful and neutral Vedana, just through the senses and through consciousness, through the senses. And then we're conditioned through sanya sankhara, culturally primed condition with language, with the prejudices, views, opinions, attitudes, assumptions of our mother, our father, our social background, and so forth. So that's why when we're mindful, we're not operating from the conditioned realm. We're not operating from the conditioning we get through culture, through social conditioning. It's not a Asian ability or a European. It's a natural ability that the Buddha emphasized. And that the Buddha itself, the word Buddha means awakened consciousness in a human individual. Awakened to reality. And then what we awaken to is the changing conditions that we have to experience. The Sakyatitti, Silabbata Paramasa, Vicikicca. The first three fetters, or Sangyojanas, Sangyot, these are the conditioning we get after we're born. After we already have a body and a consciousness and a body, then it's conditioned. It has its own karma, but then also it's influenced by the feelings, attitudes, biases, cultural attitudes, social assumptions and that of our parents and peers, family and tribe and social group and generation. By our gender, what we identify with the gender of the body. So if you notice, the wars, the problems are all around attachment to these conditions, these identities, views and opinions, prejudices and biases that we acquire. And so it's contemplated when we're aware. Mindfulness puts us back into that infantile state before we start thinking. But a baby, has its own wisdom to survive, so it operates from instinctual intelligence. It knows when it's hungry, when it's tired, and so forth. But now we're adult men, and so we have a whole baggage, a whole pack on our back of conditioned attitudes and phenomena that influence how we see ourselves in the world around us. So in the monastic life, such as we're living it here at Nanacha, recognize that it's not for conditioning to just create a new identity from the self position, but it gives us it's a vehicle for reflection, for observing and witnessing, knowing Dhamma. When all conditions, the Dhamma of impermanence. All conditions are impermanent. Anicca dukkha anatta. And then that's a way of reflecting, to break down the attachments, to begin to see through the clinging, the obsessiveness, the compulsiveness that we might have in our relationship to the self and our views and opinions. And then we can begin to see we more and more reflect on when something's present and absent, when anger is present, when it's not present, when lust is present, when it's not present, when delusions of various sorts, worry is present when it's not present. We're observing the presence and absence of conditioned phenomena in our own mind, in our citta. And so that's what Bhutto, or this intuitive ability that as this species of creature on this planet, humanity, human beings, we can actually use. And this is what this is the teaching of the Buddha as we've inherited it through a tradition. If he hadn't established a tradition, it would have died out and forgotten long ago. 2,555 years ago, nobody would remember the wise ascetic Gautama, who said he was the Buddha. Probably there's many Bhajeka Buddhas or enlightened individuals who have realized Dhamma, but have not established any conventional form to carry it through in time. And so that's one reason why the Theravada school is so successful as a tradition, because it has been able to carry this teaching of the Buddha and to keep within the limitation structure of the Vinaya as a part of a tradition. And if we didn't have that, then it would have died out long ago. So that's the value of a tradition. That's why, there's a lot of pressure to change the tradition, modernize it, make it more with the times, more psychological, more appealing to stressed out people in New York City and so forth, to make it, so that it can be a kind of psychotherapeutic approach. But with my encounter with Luang Por Chah and training with him, it was through this kind of practice that I began to understand and appreciate this tradition as a tradition. Again, Americans, we don't have very many traditions. 4th of July, I think. Just one. American independence from the oppressive British. But that's not very old. Not even 300 years old. So this is 2,555 years it survived through how many civilizations, kingdoms, successes and failures and changing conditions on an ongoing upheaving level of the whole history of humanity from that time to the present. So this is, to try to, what I'm trying to do is, encourage you to use this form for this awakening. Learn to recognize it's not about making yourself into anything or attaining. People talk about attaining stream entry and once returner, non-returner arahant, and I just don't like to speak like that, because those are mere ways of suggestions to help us to observe. They're not for identity, not for me as a personality to become a stream emperor, or an arahant, or not to become one, or whatever. It's not about language, about identity, but about mindfulness and wisdom. And so these teachings of the Buddha then are, here to, then if you just grasp them, the words themselves, the concepts that you interpret through your cultural conditioned approach to life and self-views, it's better probably to attach to it out of ignorance than to attach to other things. I'm not denying that. But to get the full benefit and appreciation of these teachings, of the very skillful teachings the Buddha left us, and how to use the Vinaya, then this takes the actual practice, willing to relinquish, to live within the boundaries of this Vinaya, and to observe one's own reaction, one's own emotional reaction to restraint, to living within community, with the core what that Luang Por Chah emphasized so much. Learning to live within structures, and that we begin to see our own ego, our own views, our ways of seeing tradition or cultural conditioning. Those of us who come from outside of Thailand, our own views about Thailand, about Thai Buddhism, and on like that. Through this kind of reflection, we begin to see those as views, not as truths or assumptions that we operate from. because we're moving not toward identity in even a religion, but to free ourselves from identity. So it's like a total relinquishment of conditioned phenomena, which is not annihilation, but a relinquishment means letting things be what they are. We have to live within the structures of our own human form till it dies, and within the societies that we're part of. And we choose this particular limitation. We ask 3 times to take the precepts to become a samanera, a bhikkhu. And then why do we do it? Not for an identity, but it's a convention to encourage us to awaken to the reality of Dhamma. So I offer this as a reflection for this evening. It's an encouragement, not meant to be even a teaching, but encouragement to learn how to trust yourself more, to open, to observe, rather than operate from all kinds of views and opinions and prejudices. So I offer this for reflection.